That blizzard hit without warning. 1 second, the perimeter sensors showed absolutely nothing. Then I appeared out of the white, just a girl. Barely 18, I moved through that storm like I was born inside it. No escort, no signal. My jacket was thin and faded, my boots already 3 winters past their prime. I walked straight toward the gate. Those guards just looked at each other. One laughed, a dry, mocking sound the wind immediately stole. I stopped at the barrier. Didn't raise my hands, didn't flinch as the rifle swung my way. I spoke clearly over the howling gale. "Give me a gun." The laughter that followed filled the room. It filled the radio channels and the briefing room 3 corridors deep. That's where Colonel Doss set down his coffee and stared at the monitor. On his screen, I was looking directly into the security camera. My eyes were the color of a frozen river back then, and just as still. Doss felt something in his chest go quiet. He finally pressed the intercom. "Bring her in." Back then, Firebase Keller was 40 miles north of anything with a name on a map. It was remote in summer. By January, when the storms rolled off the Rockies, it felt like the edge of the world. Choppers were grounded for 36 hours. Our satellite link flickered out every 20 minutes. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive on roads that had vanished under 3 feet of snow. Nobody ever came to Keller during a blizzard. Especially not on foot. Private Webb had been on gate duty 4 hours when he finally spotted me. He blinked, rubbed his eyes with a gloved fist, and looked again. I was still there. Webb and his partner, Corporal Ostrowski, went completely still. "You seeing this?" "Yeah." She actually walked out of that. Ostrowski gestured at the white wall past the fence. Visibility was less than 50 yards. That storm swallowed everything. Trees, hills, and the roads they had plowed twice. I had come from inside all of it. I was slight, maybe 5'4" in those boots, hair plastered against my face by wind. My olive drab jacket had no insignia and was soaked through at the shoulders. My hands hung loosely. Fingers pale at the tips, knuckles raw. No pack, no weapon, no radio. There was nothing to explain how I had crossed 40 miles of wilderness in a storm that grounded everything. I walked like someone who knew exactly where they were going. That was the detail that set Webb's teeth on edge. It wasn't the impossibility of my presence. He knew people did impossible things all the time in his experience. Usually because they were desperate, stupid, or a dangerous mix of both. It was my movement. It was too measured, too deliberate. Every step was placed with the economy of someone who knew that wasted motion was just wasted energy. And energy meant survival. I hadn't just stumbled out of the wilderness that day. I was a girl who had walked through it on purpose. Webb stepped out of the booth. The cold hit him like a hard, flat palm. He felt it even through the layers of insulated gear that cost the taxpayers $400. The wind found him. He had to shout just to be heard over it. "Stop right there. Identify yourself." I stopped. Not because I was startled, though. Just because I decided to. "My name is Cora Vane." My voice was steady, controlled in a way that didn't match how I looked, a girl who should have been shivering and exhausted. "I need to speak with the commanding officer." Webb looked at Ostrowski, then back at me. "Ma'am," he said, choosing his words with caution, "this is a restricted military installation. You can't be here." He asked how I even managed it. The road was impassable. I told him I came through the northeast ridgeline approach. "There is a gap in your sensor grid at bearing 047, about 60 meters from marker post 14. I told them they might want to flag that. Only silence followed. The wind screamed between us. Back then, Webb had already been in the military for 6 years. He had stood guard at 3 different installations across 2 continents during his career. He had dealt with civilian incursions many times before. Confused hunters, conspiracy theorists, and the occasional journalist trying their luck. None of them had ever opened with a detailed list of his facility's security flaws. I said it with the casual tone of someone just reading off a grocery list. Ostrowski had her hand on her radio before she even realized she was reaching for. "Get the colonel," she said quietly. Her eyes never once drifted away from me. Webb kept his rifle level, his eyes locked on me. I wasn't moving or shivering, which felt deeply wrong. The wind chill that night was pushing -30. I was wearing a jacket that belonged in a thrift store, not out in the tundra. My gaze drifted up to the wide-angle security camera mounted right above the gate. It was a military camera, positioned to cover the full approach from every possible angle. I looked at it the way someone looks at an old acquaintance, calm, recognizing, and then, for just a fraction of a second, so brief that Webb would later doubt he even saw it. Something moved behind my eyes. Not fear and not relief, but pure calculation. They put me in conference room B. It was not a kind room. Harsh, fluorescent light. It felt as harsh as an interrogation lamp, though it was just a standard fixture. It had been installed by someone who had never considered the ambiance. A steel table was bolted to the floor. Chairs were designed for function over comfort. Their edges were squared and unforgiving. A one-way mirror sat along the east wall that everyone in the room ignored. Acknowledging it would mean admitting that this was all being recorded. Admitting that would change the dynamic in ways that nobody was ready to explore. Colonel Harlan Doss sat at the head of the table. He was 53 back then. He was built compact and solid, with close-cropped gray hair and the face of a leader. He had spent a whole career making decisions that could never be unmade. He had been commanding Firebase Keller for 8 months at that point. That meant he had spent 8 months in one of the most isolated outposts in North America. He was doing work that did not officially exist. He was very good at his job. He was even better at reading rooms, and this one told him something he couldn't categorize. To his left sat Captain Renata Scholes, the intelligence liaison. She had served 2 tours in Eastern Europe with a lethal kind of composure. It came from seeing things she would never put in an official report. Her pen was out and her notepad was open. She had written nothing yet. To his right sat Staff Sergeant Owen Briggs, head of the Keller Special Operations Detachment. He had the build and demeanor of a man who found most situations beneath his concern. He was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, ignoring the one-way mirror completely. He was looking at me. 3 others filled the seats, all armed, all watching me closely. I sat across from them. They had given me a blanket to ward off the cold. I had folded it neatly on the chair beside me and just left it there. Someone had set a coffee in front of me. I hadn't even touched it. Steam rose from the cup, the only warmth in that room, but I sat straight, hands flat. Harsh fluorescent lights caught the angles of my face, sharp jaw, dark and steady eyes. A thin scar traced my left eyebrow, old and pale. It was the kind of mark that had long since become part of me, not just a wound. Up close, I looked younger than 18, and somehow much, much older. Both were true. It was a contradiction Doss found unsettling, though he couldn't fully say why. He studied me for a long, quiet moment. I didn't mind the silence. I didn't shift in my chair or move an inch. I never reached for the coffee or fidgeted with the buttons on my old jacket. I just waited. I had already learned that rushing things only produces far worse outcomes. "Miss Vane," Doss finally said, "tell me how you reached this military installation." "I already told your guards." Northeast Ridge, a gap in your sensor grid. I knew they had heard me the first time. He leaned in. "I want to know why." My eye scanned the table, cataloging them. I didn't try to hide it. That quick, systematic assessment of every single person in the room. I started with Briggs. He was the obvious physical threat. Then Scholes. Pen and notepad meant a record, and records always meant risk. I checked the exits. There were two. The door I had come through and the secondary access point behind that mirror. Briggs noticed. His jaw tightened. "I need to see your commanding officer," I said. "Your actual commander, not some mid-level department head." "The general?" Doss hesitated. "General Whitmore is busy. I told him to make him available." I paused for exactly one beat. The timing, the weight I put into that silence, it was clinical. I added a simple, "Please." Scholes set her pen down. Her voice was even, careful. The voice of a professional who had interrogated people in 3 languages and knew how to apply pressure. "Young lady, I do not know how you breached our high-security perimeter. Nor do I know who sent you, but you are sitting in a restricted military facility. You have 30 seconds to give us a reason not to throw you in a cell until this storm passes." I looked her right in the eye. My gaze was steady, neither aggressive nor submissive. I looked at her as an equal. "I understand my position," I said. "I will give you a reason." I said it simply. No defiance, no nerves. I wasn't performing. I was just stating a fact I had already verified and was now communicating. Then I looked back at Doss. "Give me a gun." The silence lasted a full second, heavy with everyone trying to process my request. Then Briggs started laughing. It was not cruelty exactly. It was just that involuntary release of tension. When something is so far beyond expectation, the mind needs a vent. A girl, soaking wet, wrapped in a thin jacket, just sitting there. I was facing 6 armed soldiers in a restricted base, and I was asking for a weapon. I watched the others around that table follow Briggs's lead. It wasn't exactly mockery, more like nervous, disbelieving laughter from men who suddenly realized they were in a situation without any known protocol. I didn't react. I just waited for them to finish with the same cold patience I'd kept since walking through the gate. Their laughter ran its course for 20 seconds. Maybe 30. Then it died out, one person at a time, as they realized I wasn't going to perform any embarrassment for them. Briggs leaned across the table and asked, "Can you even handle a firearm, sweetheart?" That word landed in the room, deliberate, condescending, and heavy. He was testing me, not for information, but for a reaction. He wanted my composure to break. I just shifted my eyes toward him, slowly. My head never moved. My body didn't move. The room's temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. I told him I don't miss. Before he spoke, I simply pushed back my left sleeve. The mark sat right there on my inner forearm. Not ink, not a tattoo, but something older. A brand or a burn. It occupied that violent, uncomfortable space that exists between the two. A shape roughly 2 inches wide. A stylized talon, rendered in lines far too precise for anything improvised. Its geometry was perfect. This wasn't the work of some amateur with a kit and a tutorial. It was the result of a procedure, a mark requiring both intent and specialized equipment. And above everything else, a decision made for me long before I was ever old enough to make decisions for myself. The room processed it in stages. Briggs was the first to stop laughing. He stood there with his mouth open, then shut it, swallowing whatever he'd been about to say. His eyes were fixed on that mark. I saw his face completely change. Not recognition yet, but the precursor to it. The shape of a thing he'd heard of but never seen. Scholes felt that something had shifted. The entire air in the room seemed to reorganize itself around a new center of gravity, though she didn't know why. Her gaze flickered from my arm up to Doss's face. Doss had gone completely still. Not the stillness of shock, but of a man facing something he thought was a myth. Seeing it across a steel table in a blizzard meant he had to rapidly restructure every single fact he'd previously believed was settled. "Clear the room," he said. Nobody argued. They had known Das long enough to recognize when an order was truly non-negotiable. They filed out within 20 seconds. Briggs was last. He moved slower than the others, his eyes fixed on my arm until the door finally shut. The room went silent. I lowered my sleeve. Das reached the intercom panel before their footsteps in the corridor had even faded. His voice was tightly controlled. Controlled the way a man speaks when he's trying to hide the fact that he's truly terrified. "I need General Whitmore, now. Conference room B." A pause. "Tell him I need him to come personally. Tell him—" He stopped. He recalibrated. "Tell him I need him to look at something." Static. Then the voice on the line asked what they should say. "It is regarding the Colonel." Das stared at the mark on my arm, which was still visible beneath my pushed-up sleeve. That Talon shape, the absolute precision of those lines. Today, you and I look at that mark. It was part of me before I knew its name. "Tell him," Das said, "that I found a black Talon marker." I remember the 3 seconds of silence. "Say that again, Colonel." "You heard me." He cut the intercom and turned toward me. I just watched him. My expression had not changed back then. My sleeve was still pushed back. The mark caught the harsh fluorescent light. A tiny detail in a massive cold room, yet its weight made the walls close in. "You know what it means," I told him. It wasn't a question. "I know what it is supposed to mean," Das replied, his voice surgically precise. He was measuring every single word, like a surgeon preparing for the first cut. He also knew the program linked to that mark had been officially shut down. Officially, it never existed. Of course, the things that matter rarely do. 4 minutes later, the door finally opened. General Elliot Whitmore was 71 years old back then. He moved like a man who had carried heavy burdens for a long time and learned to balance them. He balanced the weight across his body. His silver hair was cropped close. A face mapped by weather and hard decisions, showing the kind of aging only time brings. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale, gray, and piercingly clear. The kind of eyes that had seen too much to ever be surprised again. He had led operations in 3 wars that were never written into history books. He had signed off on missions no oversight committee would ever be allowed to see. He buried his secrets so deep he sometimes forgot where they were hidden. But in moments like that one, the old secrets always found a way back. He walked into the room and looked straight at the mark on my forearm. Something shifted in his face. It was something Das had never seen in months of service. The general's hands had stayed steady through 30 years of global crisis. Through boardrooms and bomb sites, he was the man who made the hard calls. Decisions of life and death. And yet, his hands trembled. Just barely. He hid the shake before anyone else saw it, but I noticed it. Whitmore crossed the room and sat down across from me, moving slowly. It wasn't age that slowed him down. He was giving himself time to handle what he saw. "Who sent you?" His voice was nothing more than a ragged whisper. The whisper of a man speaking to a ghost he had mourned. I looked at him steadily. My gray eyes did not waver for a second. "No one," I told him. "I came on my own." "That is not possible." "And yet," I said, glancing at the door, "here I am." He stayed silent. The lights hummed. Somewhere in the base, a ventilation system cycled on, then off. "You were too young," he finally said. "The program ended before you existed." He stopped. I saw the moment the realization finally hit his face. A truth he had been fighting for years, but one he could no longer deny. He could no longer hide behind lies. "Who are you?" he asked me. The question had changed. It wasn't about operations anymore. It was personal. I looked at him. For the first time since I walked through those gates, I pulled my sleeve back down, hiding the mark like I was putting it away. It had served its purpose. It was just a key, not who I really was. I think you and I both know that my file never really existed. Scholes had been running searches for me for 11 minutes when General Whitmore left conference room B. 11 minutes had passed. 6 different databases, 4 classification levels, and 2 separate identity systems. She had run my name through civilian records and through military enrollment, through federal registries and school databases that covered every single county in the entire United States. 0 hits. Not a record that was sealed. Not a file marked classified. She lacked the clearance to open. 0. An absence so complete, it was its own form of intel. She tried again. Cora Vane. She checked every spelling. Vane. Vane. My name. Cora. Cora. Scholes caught Doss outside the room. Her voice was a low whisper. There is no record of this girl anywhere on Earth. On paper, I do not exist. Not in any system she can access, and she can access everything. I know that is impossible. She stopped herself, then started again. How can a person just not exist? Even orphans have files. Even children born in the most remote places have birth records, medical histories, and school enrollment. He told her I grew up in a military facility. Doss stared at the closed door of conference room B. A place that also does not exist. Outpost Meridian, he said. He only knew the name because the general just told him. It ran for 12 years on a hidden black budget. The data was deleted when the program it supported was killed. He paused. We were not there for school, we were trained. That distinction meant everything. Education gives you knowledge and lets you decide your path. Training gives you capability and tells you exactly what you are for. Just children, she realized. The word had weight, orphans, or close enough. Children whose parents died in missions, so classified, their very existence was scrubbed from every record. Or children whose families were never part of the system, because they were also products of that same black program. Doss looked at her, one generation producing another. It was the long game they had been playing. Scholes finally asked what program. Doss whispered the name. Black Talon. Inside conference room B, the lighting felt less harsh as I waited. Whitmore sat across from me and looked at me with the intense focus of a man who found a ghost he never expected and is trying to understand the meaning. There was a woman once, he told me. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Long ago, she came through the original black program, one of the first volunteer cohorts, before they used the children. He said she was the best operative he ever saw. Precise and fearless, she could read a tactical situation before anyone else. She did not analyze. She read it like text on a page. Pattern recognition so fast it looked like pure instinct. Another pause. She vanished on a mission in 2007. No body. He spent 2 years trying. I was listening without moving. You have her eyes, Whitmore said. The words cost him something to admit. I'd been told her name was Clara Vane. A whisper, my first real reaction. I tightened my jaw, killing the emotion before it could ever fully form. It was the reaction of someone receiving information they already possess, but never expected to hear spoken aloud by a man like him. I knew he'd heard I was raised at Meridian since I was 3. Then you know what they tried to turn me into. I met his gaze without flinching. I decided what I was going to be on my own terms. There's a difference between what someone shapes you for and what you choose. Whitmore stared at me for a long time, studying the architecture of my face, noting my sharp jaw and the cold, hard discipline in my posture. It was not passivity. I was ready, the same way Clara had been. I had that same gift for being present without ever being noticed. To exist in a room like a change in air pressure. He asked why I was there. Because they are back, I said. The people who shut down Meridian. I said it evenly, no drama, just a fact that was dangerous and real. The people who murdered my mother. Before Whitmore could respond, before he could ask the question I saw forming, the facility's alarm system shattered the silence. Not a drill, not a minor alert. That deep, rhythmic pulse that everyone at Firebase Keller had been trained to recognize and to treat as the one sound that meant everything was changing. 3 short blasts, a pause, 3 more. We had contact. Hostile forces. It was an active engagement. I was up and moving before the second siren finished. They hit us from 2 directions at once. Briggs noted that immediately, and it told us everything we needed to know about who we were fighting. Amateurs always just attack from one single direction. They mass their force at a single point and try to push through. Experienced teams split up. They force you to defend 2 vectors, dividing your focus and your fire. And a divided target is a target that's already compromised. These people were professionals. North perimeter went dark. Sensors were cut, not jammed. To us, that distinction mattered immensely. Jamming sensors takes brute force. Cutting them requires knowing exactly where they are hidden. Someone had done deep reconnaissance on Firebase Keller. Extensive, careful, and very patient reconnaissance. 4 minutes after the alarm, the casualty report came from Checkpoint Charlie. 2 guards down, but non-lethally. They were neutralized. That precision was more alarming than if my guards had been slaughtered in cold blood. Killing guards was desperate. It was the mark of amateurs. Knocking them out was a statement. We could have killed you, but we chose not to. It was the cold calculation of professionals with a very specific objective. Briggs had his detachment in the main corridor 90 seconds after that first alarm. 6 operators in full gear, moving on nothing but pure instinct. He was on the radio, directing fire teams with a decade of combat experience behind him. Outside, the storm was as much an enemy as the terrain. Visibility was essentially 0. Wind was cutting horizontally across the perimeter, carrying every sound unpredictably. Briggs had good men, but even the best have limits in a total whiteout. Drone contact. Reyes called it in. 3 units in the northeast quadrant. Small, fast, military grade. Their counter-drone tech was jammed. They were running a broadband suppressor. Briggs felt the weight of it. Suppression like that takes specialized gear. Expensive, high-end hardware. The kind you never find through standard channels. Right then, he realized the threat level was much higher than he thought. I appeared in the corridor. I had covered the distance from the conference room in seconds. I had slipped past the 2 guards at the door without triggering an alarm. I was already fast and quiet back then, paying close attention to every shadow. I had been mapping the layout of the facility since the second I walked inside. Our eyes met. I gave him the only order that mattered: seal the generator room. That was their next target. I asked if he would finally listen to me. My voice was precise. I had learned that clarity is far more effective than volume. I told him his sensors were gone. That was just phase 1. Their communications had dropped 4 minutes earlier. Phase 2 was already in motion. They left a partial signal so he would not call for a tactical extraction. They wanted him distracted. Phase 3 was the power. Cut that and they own everything. No cameras, no lights, and no electronic locks to stop them. I looked at his team. I asked if they had ever trained in total darkness. They do, I said. Briggs finally took a step toward me. He saw a civilian in a firefight. I just asked him for a gun. Then the blast hit, surgical and precise, the kind they use to cripple a circuit. It bypassed the main infrastructure, but forced the east wing onto emergency backup power. The corridor lights flickered and then dimmed by 30%. Phase 2.5, I noted. They were moving way ahead of schedule. It meant they had inside intelligence about the timeline of this facility. Someone had mapped this operation using data you could never get from the outside. The radio crackled. The guard near the generator room reported movement 3 halls away. Someone was moving through the maintenance shaft on the south side. 2 contacts, moving fast. They knew exactly which shaft would get them inside. Briggs looked at me. I just waited for him to see the truth. He reached for his sidearm. He was not arming me. He was getting ready to fight. He knew the situation had advanced past the point of standing still. But I had already taken the pistol from his holster. I moved so cleanly, it took him 2 seconds to realize his hand was empty. I was not aggressive or violent. It was just a perfectly economical movement. So geometrically precise that he could not even find a reason to be angry. Like a person catching a falling object, the reaction time was compressed. The motion was finished before his brain could even process the decision. I checked the chamber, the magazine, the safety, and the balance. Each action took a half second. It was the rhythm of a practiced professional. I handed it back. I told him I needed a rifle with range. Their sniper was 400 meters out, perfectly hidden in that blinding whiteout. A standard sidearm only reaches 20 meters. That was not going to be enough. You and I both know we needed more to stop what was coming. I needed a rifle. Briggs held my sidearm. I had come back for him. He looked at the weapon, then at me. "Reyes," he said after 3 seconds. "Give her your M110. I walked out that east door alone. No one ordered it. No one authorized it in any sense I would recognize. I told them I needed a shot from outside, and I needed it now. Before anyone could think of an objection, I was already moving. Briggs did not stop me. Looking back, he would wonder why for a long time. Maybe it was my movement, a certain quality that made any argument feel impossible. Or maybe some part of him had already seen what I was capable of. Something his conscious mind hadn't quite managed to catch up to yet. I checked the wind direction by watching the snow angle through the light. I adjusted my grip on the M110 and pulled the door open. That storm hit me like a solid wall. -18 degrees with wind cutting sideways. The snow wasn't falling anymore. It moved horizontally, everywhere at once. The exterior lights cast dim yellow cones. I could only see the ground directly beneath me through the blowing whiteout. Nothing beyond 5 feet of visibility. Somewhere out there in that white. 400 meters northeast sat a trained sniper hidden with a thermal scope. Briggs watched me through the exterior camera feed. The image was likely a mess of interference and motion artifacts. The camera was struggling with the cold, but the feed was still running. Through the static of that gray and white grain, he could see me. I walked to a position 30 meters from the building and stopped. I didn't take cover. I didn't hide behind any of the fixtures. Not the fuel storage, the generator housing, or the concrete barriers. Standing there in the open near the east entrance, I raised the rifle. Everyone in the corridor with access to a monitor was watching me. "She is standing in the open," Operator Reyes said to the room. His voice carried no judgment, only the flat disbelief of a witness. He was watching something that contradicted everything he knew about survival. "She is going to get killed," someone whispered. I lowered myself down to one knee. The rifle came up, stock against my shoulder, eye at the optic. Everything aligned. I was perfectly still, not the stillness of the cold, but the deep stillness of someone who has found a place inside themselves. A place the storm cannot reach, where the world's noise stops. In front of me sat a white wall. Beyond it, invisible in any practical sense, was a person. A trained lethal shooter who had chosen his position with care. He thought he was safe, beyond what anyone would call a viable shot. "You cannot do this," Reyes said to himself, or the screen. "You cannot take a 400-meter shot in this storm. The wind alone, the variable drag, the thickness of the air. You would have to compensate for things you cannot even measure." My rifle cracked, one shot clean and unhurried. The wind swallowed the sound instantly, leaving a silence far deeper than the one I had broken before. For 3 seconds, the monitor stayed dark. Then Briggs' radio crackled into life, cutting through the quiet. My fire team was out there in the northeast perimeter, moving through the field under heavy thermal cover. "Target down," the operator reported. There was a pause, that silence born from pure, unfiltered confusion. Single shot. Where did it come from? They knew there was no viable firing position in range. Briggs stared at his monitor, searching for answers. I just lowered my rifle and stood up. I turned back toward the building with the same surgical precision I had used since I first arrived. I looked straight into the lens of the exterior camera. Then I walked inside. The briefing room fell silent when I entered. Whitmore, Doss, Scholes, and Briggs were all waiting. The operation's chaos hummed outside, but in that small pocket of space, everything seemed to freeze. They were huddled around a monitor, trying to process the impossible shot they had just witnessed. I handed my rifle to Reyes. He had been using the Northeast Ridge water tower as a reference. I told him that in a total whiteout, you lose every navigational reference point you have. Only permanent structures stay fixed. I calculated his most probable position relative to that anchor. I accounted for the wind, a steady 40 miles per hour gusting out of the northwest that night. That required a 4-degree windage correction plus extra elevation for the massive temperature drop outside. Air density changes how the rounds fly. I paused, knowing the math was not that complicated. Simple geometry and physics. Nobody spoke. General Whitmore just kept his eyes on me. He looked at me the way a man looks at a ghost, confirming a fear he had hoped was false. "Haiku," he whispered. An old habit, a scrap of a phrase from a completely different life. He caught himself, seeing me. "You and I know this was just the beginning." We moved to the facility's deepest vault. No windows, just thick steel walls designed for total isolation. The construction used a layer of copper mesh specifically to kill any electronic signals or eavesdropping. That level of security told me everything about the secrets they expected to share in that room. We sat at a table that had seen more classified intel than most high-level government committees. Its surface was scarred by years of heavy documents, nervous elbows, and the friction of desperate people. We were tackling problems that could not exist anywhere else. Whitmore took his place at the head. Dawson Scholes sat to his right, and Briggs was positioned directly across from me. I leaned my M110 against my chair like I'd carried it forever. "She was Black Talon," Whitmore said. The name hit the room with a heavy, crushing weight. That weight came from how rarely those words had ever been uttered in public. It was authorized in 1989 under a strictly classified Joint Intelligence Directive. That directive has been erased from every single accessible digital database. The goal was to build operatives who could survive and function in the world's harshest environments. We were built for zones that would crush normal soldiers. It meant surviving extreme cold and months of total isolation, high-noise combat zones, and psychological pressure that would have shattered the mind of any other soldier. He paused. But our true purpose was far simpler. They were creating human weapons, highly specialized, lethal. He looked right at me as he spoke, his voice completely steady. Every record of what I was meant to stay buried under deep classification. But the world shifted, and now the old ghosts are finally coming back for us. I did not even blink. I knew that bloody history better than anyone else. The silence grew heavy. As we will see, the past always catches up eventually. Whitmore leaned back, staring at me as the true scale of his discovery finally sank in. Living weapons. Scholes asked if we had volunteered. At first, the cohort were volunteers, veteran agents who understood the risks. They accepted conditioning and training far beyond any standard military protocol. He studied the data. The results were extraordinary, too extraordinary to be real. The overseers realized the volunteer group's effectiveness had reached its limit. Progress was stalled by the effort needed to erase their prior experiences. The handlers had to dismantle their old loyalties and sense of self. They concluded the perfect subject was someone who had never built those structures. Silence hit the room. Children. We were selected based on specific profiles. They looked for elite threat processing and accelerated physical learning curves. We had naturally suppressed fear responses, not gone, as that would be reckless. Everything was controlled. My training began at the earliest possible age. Meridian experts called it viable. Shaped. That's how they described us. Shaped. Scholes asked who authorized using children. People who put the mission first. Whitmore sounded cold. People who had the authority and chose to use it. He claimed he wasn't one of them, just managing handlers, never making policy. He paused, admitting he didn't object enough, a regret he's lived with for years. He looked at me. Officially, the program was shuttered in 2009. 17 of us were active at termination. Most were reassigned or retired. 3 were children at Outpost Meridian. He claimed they told him we'd relocated. He was told we were given identities and normal lives. He believed it was handled. It wasn't. I know that now, because Meridian never actually closed its doors. I told them the government cut the funding and the official paper trail. The facility went completely dark. The money started coming from a private source. It was the man who had originally served as Black Talon's director. He never believed the program should end. He believed it should expand. I looked around the table and gave them his name, Hargrove. For 15 years, he's used our methodology to build a private intelligence network. Using his own resources, he kept the facility where I grew up operational. The training and conditioning never stopped. I paused, remembering it. I stayed there until 4 years ago. Doss assumed I escaped. I told him I left. That distinction was precise. It was intentional. There's a massive difference between escaping and choosing to walk away. I walked out when I had enough intel to be useful. I watched him. And when I realized Hargrove wasn't just building a simple spy program, he was building an army, private, deniable, and under his total control. Scholes asked what he wanted here. Whitmore whispered a single word: the archive. I nodded. When Doss asked which archive, Whitmore answered, Black Talon's data. Every profile, every genetic marker, and every single one of our conditioning protocols. Every method and every modification they performed on us was recorded there. It's all preserved on an air-gapped server inside this very facility. Years ago, someone decided that my history was too valuable to destroy. He looked at me, knowing that with that data, Hargrove could scale. He has the funding, the infrastructure, and the capacity to succeed. He has everything he needs to finish what they started with us years ago. Looking back, I realized the archive was the only thing he missed, those blueprints. I told them then, with that archive, he wouldn't build just dozens. He would build hundreds, eventually thousands, starting kids even younger than I was. It was more systematic, more controlled. I remember pausing there. At that time, a facility in Montana held 6 children between the ages of 4 and 9 who were in the early stages of conditioning. I knew this because I spent 4 years inside Hargrove's network myself. Before I finally escaped into the storm, I knew every location and timeline. The room went silent. Scholes asked if I was really inside his organization. I told him the truth. Hargrove recruited me when I was only 14. I explained that he had been watching me ever since the Meridian incident. He viewed me as his best result. I was his proof of concept. I looked at my hands on the table. He was right and totally wrong. Our counterattack took 18 minutes to plan and was executed in under 5. Briggs and I worked the display with the friction and efficiency of old partners. We were like two people who grew up speaking different dialects of one language. I held the strategic picture, Hargrove's playbook, and every one of his patterns. I understood the specific logic they used to prosecute an operation of this type. Briggs had the facility knowledge and the operational details only an insider knows. He had been embedded there for months. Together, we finally built a full picture. 2 teams, I said, moving the markers across the tactical display. The North team was largely done. Sensor suppression had been achieved. 2 of 3 communication objectives were complete. They were in a holding pattern. They were waiting for the East team to finish. I showed them. They were here. I pointed to a junction in the maintenance corridor on the eastern side. That specific corridor accesses the server infrastructure through the climate control junction. From that junction, the run to the archive server room is quite short. It is approximately 3 minutes at operational pace. That was the standard protocol. It involved using hardline access to copy the data, which normally takes 7 to 9 minutes. But Hargrove's people had a bypass tool specifically designed for this exact system. That told me they had been planning this operation for a very long time. With the bypass, it was only 4 minutes. Briggs asked if we had a window. I told him we had exactly the window between the junction and extraction completion. If we were not at the junction when they arrived, we would lose. Managing the situation after the data is copied is a fundamentally different problem. Briggs asked how I knew about their specific archive server locations. I told him the truth. Hargrove had been building a file for years. He had an inside source. I looked at Briggs. Someone past or present. I told him to think about who. He tightened his jaw and waited. We needed 4 people. Quiet. No radio communication of any kind. Once in that maintenance corridor, they would be scanning us. No flashlights. They were using thermal imaging. I needed the backup power to E7 cut. I checked my watch. 70 seconds. Briggs asked me why 70 seconds. Because their team leader always checks in 8 minutes after the mission starts. If E7 had power then, he would realize the facility was responding more coherently than it should be. He would accelerate the timeline. He was trained at Meridian, just like me. I knew his mind back then because he thought exactly like I did. Briggs watched me. I saw his judgment of me shifting in that moment. It was not a sudden shock, just a slow realization that he had been wrong. "Is he better than you?" Briggs asked me. I grabbed the rifle. "He used to be," I said. They found Decker in Corridor 7. Or more accurately, Decker chose to let them find him. He stood there in the shadows when we arrived, tall and in his mid-20s. He was built for speed, not bulk, with a posture that still held perfect precision. His face was so void of emotion that the neutrality became its own statement. He looked as steady as a decision already made. His weapon was down. He stared at me for a long time. 11. He used my old designation from Meridian, from the years before we had names. It was not an insult, just a fact. "Decker," I replied. "You walked right in." There was a hint of something like amusement in his tone. "Hargrove said you would," he told me. He knew if I found this facility, I would walk right in and demand weapons. He claimed I had been planning this for months. He tilted his head slightly. He was right. He usually is. That is what made him so dangerous. We both know what I was about to do would make him extremely dangerous. Decker looked at me and said, "He already sent you." "That is not neutral," I said. His eyes flicked to the others, then back. He calculated every thread in that room in a single heartbeat. I watched him do it, the same cold analysis I used to perform myself. He created us both, Decker told me. I had spent 4 years trying to believe there was more to the story. I understood him. I had lived with those same dark thoughts myself. But that rifle, I told him I chose to use it to protect people. You are exactly what he made, I said. Your choices do not change it. They change what I am, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Look at me then. You and I can see it now. I was choosing to talk instead of kill. That was all him, not the man who built us. A flicker of something human crossed his face for just a second. Behind me, Briggs held his ground. He knew better than to interrupt us. Project Daughter, Decker said. The air turned cold. That was your file name, he continued. The rest of us were just numbers, codes, or operational categories. But my file had a real name, Project Daughter. He stopped because I was more than a subject profile. I was the proof, the gold standard. Every gene, every drill, everything they ever wanted to copy. I was the physical embodiment of everything the program was trying to replicate. When the original me died, Hargrove kept every piece of her. Her DNA, her mind, her limits. He looked at me then. He did not just study her, he rebuilt her in me. Near the entrance, General Whitmore stood frozen. He had heard it all. He just stood there, listening to the cold truth we just uncovered together. I saw it in his face, the look of a man finally receiving the confirmation he'd suspected and hoped was wrong. My expression never flickered. Or maybe it did. In that way, masks slip when something strikes the one part of us control can't reach. A tiny crack in the armor, a narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tightening in my jaw. These were the marks of something I'd absorbed and buried. She was a real person, I said, my voice low. Beyond their files and whatever data they extracted and used, she was human, a living, breathing woman. She chose what she became. That's mine. Her choice belongs to me. Decker said she died for it. I knew the stakes. I raised the rifle. Not aiming yet, just a statement, and so do I. Decker looked at the weapon. He looked at me, then at the corridor where Briggs and his team waited. He warned me Hargrove had 12 operators inside. I only had 4. I told him I didn't care about the archive. He actually blinked. It was the first genuine surprise I ever saw cross his face. Then what? He asked. I was ending everything. Not just the files, Hargrove, his network, and his facilities. I told him about the children in Montana. They were younger than we were then. You know the place, Decker. You were there. A long silence followed. He finally agreed to help, if I hit him. He needed to vanish completely. New identity, new location, and enough support to outrun the hunters. Done, Whitmore said from the corridor entrance. We all turned as the general walked into the light. He looked like he carried the weight of every secret he'd heard tonight. He looked at Decker for a moment, then at me. He said my mother chose to serve something larger than herself. Every day she made that choice. It was real and it was hers. He stopped. He wanted me to know that. I told him I already knew. I'd known for a long time. The operation ended at 0347 hours. Hargrove's 12 operators were neutralized. Briggs handled the messy parts in language that would survive any official review. We secured the archive room. 2 of the North team were already talking in custody. I told Briggs exactly how to break the conditioning we'd all been given. I knew what they protect and what they were allowed to say. With that knowledge, Scholes got usable intelligence. Within 40 minutes, Decker's access codes were moved to 3 separate encrypted drives. Whitmore took personal custody of the drives, while Scholes confirmed our backup transmission was clean and secure. By 4 a.m., the storm was finally losing its teeth. By 4:30, the first gray light was pushing against the east. It was soft, cold, and tentative, early light in the high north. Arrives cautiously. Like it's been through hell and isn't sure it's welcome. I stood outside. I walked out through the east door, the same one I'd used hours before, back to the ridge where I'd lined up for the shot. The storm's remnants drifted around me, its strength finally completely spent. Looking back, the snow was deep and untouched, except for where the night left his mark. There were boot prints and the heavy drag marks from the containment team cleanup. I saw one dark point where a round buried itself in the white. I stood still. Whitmore stepped out behind me. He was carrying my old, worn olive jacket. It had been dried over a heating vent. He held it out to me. I took it and pulled it on, fixing the collar out of habit. He told me I could stay, said there was a place for someone with my skills. We could build something official, he said, with resources, authorization, and real oversight. I wouldn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I told him I knew. I watched the eastern tree line where the light was finally cutting through the dark. That wasn't the job yet. He asked what was. I didn't speak for a moment. 6 kids in Montana, I said, aged 4 to 9, held in a mountain valley. It was a ghost site, didn't exist on any map. 12 guards total. 2 were Meridian trained, the others were just contractors, competent but not me. I wasn't being arrogant, just objective. If I moved within the next 24 hours, before Hargrove's people realized what happened tonight, I could get in clean. If I waited, he would lock it down and move them. I would be tracking a moving target. Whitmore said I couldn't do it alone. I looked at him and said I arrived alone. I had survived a Category 3 storm and handled the counter-op tonight by myself. Being alone has its advantages. It is quiet, and it does not require any consensus. It means if things go wrong, the consequences fall entirely on me and not on anyone else. Use military assets and Hargrove bolts. Doss stepped outside with us then too. His hands were in his pockets, his breath visible. He said I was right. Hargrove had a dead man's switch. They had confirmed it with one of the operators. Biometric check-ins every 6 hours. One miss and the facility goes to total lockdown. Whitmore looked at Doss. Doss just confirmed I had already thought this through. Whitmore turned back to me. He asked what I needed from him. 4 hours. I needed 4 hours before anything hit the official channels. I had to be airborne and in position before the network saw the truth. I looked at him. After I rescue the children, I will need a favor. I would need a place to bring them, somewhere real. Somewhere that gave them what Meridian never could. Whitmore said he would arrange it. I knew he would. That was part of why I had come there. He watched me as the morning light began its slow, patient crawl. Light always returns after a long night. It started to catch my silhouette. My dark hair, that worn jacket, and the particular quality of stillness I carried everywhere. He asked what happens after the kids. I just looked at the horizon. Decker gave me the whole network, every location, every asset, and every name. The money, the infrastructure. Montana was just one node on the map. Different countries, different shell companies, all of them ready to go. Hargrove was just the architect. I told Whitmore he had backers. People who funded Black Talon and shielded it from any real oversight. The ones profiting from the project. I felt my jaw set tight. As long as those people exist, the program is still out there. As long as they exist, I know the program remains. The funding shifted, the location changed, the methods evolved, but the program never stopped. You're going to tear it all down, Whitmore told me. Every piece. I looked him in the eye. I was only 18 then. I had time. Whitmore reached into his jacket and handed me a matte black card. No agency logo, no name, just a single 10-digit number in clean type. A number meant for the shadows, for contacts that never leave a record. I took it, looked at it, and slipped it close to my heart. "General," I said, pausing as I searched for the right words. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a flicker of doubt. Not fear, but the weight of touching something that finally mattered. "My mother," I said. "Back then, when you knew her, was she?" I stopped myself. Was she someone? Not an operative or an experiment. I looked at him. Was she someone real? Whitmore went quiet while the wind carried the last of the storm away. Soft and gentle, the way hard things usually end. "She was the most someone I ever knew," he said. "Clara Vane owned every room. Not because she performed it, but because she was genuinely present in a way most people are not. She laughed at truth and ignored the lies. She was real. She fought for her beliefs and admitted her mistakes." He paused. "She feared loud music, but nothing that should actually frighten a person. She kept a messy notebook of words and languages she was trying to learn. None of it ever discouraged her. She was whole." I stood perfectly still, then gave him a single nod. I turned toward the trees. Briggs had come outside to join him. They stood there, watching me walk away, 2 old soldiers, a general and a battle-hardened sergeant, watching an 18-year-old girl disappear into the morning frost. I walked through the deep snow toward the tree line in the winter dawn, carrying nothing visible but everything invisible. "She is going to do it," I later learned, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Whitmore replied, "and after Montana, there is more." Whitmore watched me. "There is always more. But is she enough?" He thought of Clara Vane, who feared loud music, but not the dark, who kept her notebook of wrong words and learned them anyway. "She is exactly enough," he said. I stopped at the tree line and turned back, not toward them, but toward the open sky. The east was glowing. The storm had finally surrendered to the morning. The air was sharp, crystalline, and perfectly clean. Sunlight lay across the snow in long, even lines, the kind of morning that follows the hardest nights. I pulled back my sleeve. The black Talon on my arm caught the light. I stared at that mark for a moment, the thing they put on me to define who I was meant to be. I looked at it the way you look at something you have finally decided to keep on your own terms. Then I stepped into the trees. The woods closed in. The remaining snow drifted over my fading tracks, soft and final, covering them completely, white over white, until no trace of where I had been remained for the world. That archive sat in its sealed room, holding everything they learned about making me into a weapon. It couldn't contain what happened when I finally decided for myself what my purpose really was. I was forged from grief, ambition, and science, and the long, cold patience of those men. They believed they could engineer the soul. Honestly, they were right about most of it. They were just wrong about the part that mattered. Somewhere north of Firebase Keller, moving through that first clean morning after the storm, I was a girl who existed in no file. I was already calculating the distance to Montana. 6 children, 4 to 9 years old, had serial numbers instead of names. They didn't know yet that I was finally coming for them. I had already decided exactly what I would tell them when I arrived. "Your name is yours."